folks. Welcome to So-Called Normal. My name is Mark Hennick. Today on the show, we have author and columnist Mandy Stadtmiller. She writes for New York Magazine, the New York Post, among many, many others. And she has a book. It's not a new book anymore, but it's a great one. It's called Unwifeable. You'll be able to notice it in the memoir section of your just about any bookstore because it has a bright pink cover. That's how I found it when I was looking for it. Really great, gritty read that I think you'll really enjoy. So we talked to Mandy in New York a while ago, actually. It was back in the summer, but I still wanted to share this with you because we had such an interesting, diverse conversation about recovery in many ways. And that's the whole point of the show, of course, is that recovery is weird. It doesn't look the same for anybody. That we're all just figuring it out as we go, and we don't even always know what that really means. So whether it's an addiction, a substance use problem, or depression, or anxiety, or trying to find motivation, we get into that, Mandy and I too, about what does it mean to get motivated, and is it okay to pay for motivation if you're going to a Tony Robbins seminar or some sort of other or if it's religion, if you're paying money through religion to get inspired, what does that actually mean? And I think it looks different for everybody. So, I think you'll really enjoy the conversation that we had together. I know I sure did. It got deep in a lot of different parts. So stick with it, and I hope you enjoy. So here's my conversation with Mandy Stadtmiller. Her book is Unwifeable. I'm Mark Hennick, and this is So-Called Normal.
I think that a lot of times the meaning comes in, teasing out what's behind something that at first blush just appears like a platitude or a cliche, because I just am immediately distrustful of it, I guess, when something comes really prettily packaged as just a ABC redemption story.
Right. I was thinking about this recently. I asked people on Twitter what kind of books they rather read. Something with a really clear narrative arc. It has the beginning, middle, and end. You see all along the way where the plot is going, and there's that satisfying, simple ending. Or do you like to read for the moments along the way and almost a more mindful, present kind of stories within the stories? And there was a definite division. Some people really like to get into the meat of it, and other people just want the simple gratification of finishing the book, right? And,
sure.
And following the simple storyline. So, I don't know. I think that the interesting parts for me are in the details and in the unexpected little twists and turns along the way. And that's the whole point of doing conversations like this. Show people you don't just go from, having an addiction or being in the worst place of your life to suddenly being happy and successful and
I'm just so distrustful of anything that is packaged to me as a neat little story. I've seen too many rom-coms. Once you see behind the veil a little bit, you realize that a lot of what you thought was reality is really just being packaged for you by people who are trying to sell Coke or whatever. I think whenever I get into places of real negativity, I am often doing to myself is I am hyper focusing on some detail and I'm missing the larger picture at hand. My whole theory on spirituality is I go with the metaphor of the blind men and the elephant, where they're all describing the elephant, but they are touching different parts of it. And for one, it's Judaism, for one, it's Christianity, for one, it's Islam. And in my view, that there are a lot of different pathways to having a higher spiritual consciousness. And when you have that, a lot of times exciting things start to happen in your life and you start to be more in a state of flow, and you start to see all of these synchronicities and occasions of God winking at you. And all of it could also just be a delightful placebo effect that just really works. And I think that the reason why it's important to have that healthy skepticism is, again, just because it is so easy with something as hope-filled and alluring and transformative and manipulative as religion and spirituality, for it to be harnessed into uses that are somewhat nefarious, that you constantly do need to be reminding yourself that saying a simple prayer of goodness never costs anything, and it never should, and doing a good positive act never costs anything, and it never should. And then anytime people are trying to codify and upsell and organizationally dynamic power play you into a controlled scenario of telling you how to achieve enlightenment, that, be very wary of that.
Do you think that enlightenment, or whatever that even means, is possible? Is that why? Because I mean, if I were to pick this up and just listen to what you're saying right now without any of the other context, it sounds kind of jaded. It sounds kind of like, well, it sounds like you've been there and it didn't work.
No, I'm not saying that.
No.
No, but I mean, it's like I could call up from my phone 6 different people to preach to you about Scientology or SGI Buddhism or Kabbalah or Siddha Yoga, or Reiki or Louise Hay, New Age consciousness. They would all give you an elevator pitch as to why their way is the way.
Right.
And I think that is very dangerous, because I think that there are so many different paths. So
let me ask you a question then. Have you found the path that you think is the one that you've been talking about, that you don't need to pay for, that you don't need to?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, I've always gravitated towards, I've always liked skeptics, contrarians, atheists, cynics, because there are people who usually question what the groupthink status quo ideologic dogma that drives the mainstream conversations of society. And so someone I met in AA, who I had a long conversation with about how he could be an atheist and be involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, where the primary platform is not the primary platform. And obviously I'm not speaking, and I normally just try to say 12-step secret society. But I know I certainly wish that I knew about AA a lot earlier on. So a lot of times that's why I get it out there. But I remember talking to this atheist about how he could reconcile being an atheist with the idea of turning your willpower over to God and surrendering. How do you do that if you don't believe in God? And the language they use is that it's a higher power, and that your higher power can be anything. It can be Jesus, it can be butterflies, it can be whatever you believe a higher power is. And he said for him, it was just the concept of goodness. And that really hit home with me, because that to me seems like the commonality amongst people who are involved in various aspects of spirituality or religion. What appeals to me about them is that they all seem to be motivated in not just their words, but also very much in their actions by a sense of goodness and caring more about what happens when people aren't watching.
Right.
So yeah, I think that to me, I just think life is just, terribly difficult and burdensome, especially if you have this hyper awareness and hyper alertness of so many factors, which sometimes can lead to glorious things like you write something you're proud of, but other times just leads to just this sense that you're on. I mean, I've never done meth, but that kind of speed freaky hyper attunement where everything appears really, just loud and crushing, and the light is so bright and the sound is so loud, and the little bit of mustard on the person's shirt is so horrifically grotesque and depressing that it can be just paralyzing. And how do you combat that to get to a place of hope and possibility? Well, you just take one right action rather than trying to solve the whole puzzle in one fell swoop. And that's, I think, what I never realized and I never felt for a long time. I always felt like I needed to be perfect and have the answer and not be wrong. And I've always hated the kind of guardedness with which society a lot of times guards all the secrets that can separate different classes and strata. Why didn't popular girls or sorority girls or, the relative who complained about how men wouldn't stop proposing to her, why didn't they just tell you some of the secrets rather than guarding them? That men sometimes like it when they have a chance to miss you. That, this is how you put makeup on. That there's nothing so attractive as someone who is simply okay in being in their own skin, and that there's nothing so skin crawlingly uncomfortable as being around someone whose self-hatred is just nearly contagious and reminds you of what you don't like about yourself, and so that to me is like the point of life. Is that's why I think I do have sometimes just such a intense desire to get through, all the talking points to more of a sense of, well, here's something I didn't know, and this is how I figured it out, and here's all the details that led me to figure it out. And yeah, I thought it was all bullshit too, but then I realized that it's not, because I learned this and then I looked at it this way. I like to a lot of times take people through my own thought processes as a jaded cynic, depressive, prone to, anxiety and obsessiveness. And I feel like if I can reframe things through that context, rather than just, some tall, middle-class blonde who has some media connections who dresses like a sorority girl, that I was the girl who wet her bed until she was 15, and that I used to never be able to see a doctor without just collapsing into tears, and then being unable to get past that to even get to whatever it was that I wanted to say, but that I just felt so terrified of someone having access to, the abyss of my inner pain, that all I could do was cry. And so I guess I just want to always be able to give people as full and as transparent a picture as possible. And to me, in talking about how media works, that is me trying to tell people secrets that have helped me learn how to navigate the world and also to mistrust it in a healthy way.
It sounds like to create some distance too, though, to intellectualize it, because I just noticed a shift happened when you're talking about sitting in front of your doctor, being afraid not to expose that darkness inside you.
Oh, yeah.
That's when you start talking about, and then I want to explain to others, and that's when the intellectualization seems to kick in, the defense.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think I was also realizing that whenever I talk about things that are super real, it's easy for me to start crying, and that I have had 2 hours of sleep and I don't think I've taken my 200 milligrams of Zoloft today. And to me, I guess there's something mawkish about, trotting out a very intimate form of grief and depression like a dog and pony show. Podcasts are wonderful, and talking about the most painful things in life are wonderful. But I think a big part of my own journey has been in learning healthy boundaries. Yeah. And I think that I guess I realized that in talking about something that does bring up a lot of pain for me, that there is some level of privacy to that, and that's okay. So I think that probably with the defense mechanism, which I'm sure is there, I'm super defensive. There's also the recognition that when you tell your story a lot, you kind of I want my book to speak for itself. And I've had a lot of people say, oh, I laughed so hard. But I've also had a lot of people say like, oh, it left me in tears.
Yeah.
And you want to recognize that you don't need to put yourself through the depth of pain and agony that resulted in reaching a certain level of insight into your sadness every time you talk about it.
Sure.
I guess I am kind of jaded, but I mean, I think you get an idea of what I'm trying to say.
I think it's a good thing. Not only are you entitled, obviously, to your privacy, but being able to know what that line is, what your boundaries are, and for your own self-care. And hey, there's some stuff that people just aren't in a place yet where they can unpack it, or if they've already done it and they want to leave it done, sometimes that, they don't want to go back there. But there's lots of different reasons, and I don't think there's anybody. You're the only person that owns your story, right? And you can do with it whatever the hell you want. And when I read the book, I can tell you that while it was hilarious, I saw the vulnerability in it too. I saw somebody who was really wanted to be liked, and who wanted,
oh God, yeah,
and in some ways have, I think, difficulty in the 45 minutes or whatever it is that we've known each other now.
Yeah.
Difficulty in really staying in the present and being uncomfortable and just letting that be and letting it pass in a very mindful kind of way, always seeking external sources of validation, maybe.
Yeah. See, to me, like, I think that I do have trouble staying in the moment, but I think that I also just have a desperation to try and convey things that to me have personally been illuminating and life-changing.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think that it's hard to
help people. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, that's my way of trying to do any kind of goodness, is just, I feel like so many people hide behind. I mean, I feel like I've listened to so many podcasts now, and it's like,
no.
Unless you are the world's most hilarious human, hearing yet another person joke about something in the moment feels sometimes just feels like I've heard it a million times. And so sometimes I just don't, I just get sick of that kind of superficiality or whatever.
Yeah.
But back to the external sources of validation, I recommended this book to someone the other day, which I just wanted to briefly mention, which is, it's called The 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. And it's one of the best books I've ever read for building up in yourself and understanding how to give yourself that sense of personal validation that we were talking about outside of, therapy and anything else that you can do that's like a tool, which is what to me all these things are, is just do whatever you can, do one right action, and that could lead to the next good thing. Like, you don't have to have it all figured out. Like, I think that to me is probably the biggest secret of all, which sounds so trite, but when you are a kid, you don't realize that.
Especially if you're a perfectionist kid. I mean, speaking
oh my
personally, but
God, yeah. If you have that kind of drama of the gifted child mindset where you would rather just say, well, I didn't really try, and so that's why I only got 80% on the test, because I could have tried, but and then you always have that plausible deniability versus having to deal with the heartbreak of having tried your hardest and maybe you didn't succeed, or maybe it was a failure.
If you expect things to be shitty, then you won't be let down. If
absolutely.
You expect to fail, then you won't be let down.
That was my entire philosophy for my whole life until, when my book Unwifeable begins in 2005 was, I would say, right around the time when The Secret and everything entered into mass public consciousness. It was really the first time that I, not because of that book, but I think because of my entire ego obliteration that came with realizing that nothing was what it seemed, that everything was the Matrix, that the person who I thought was my best friend despised me and was cheating on me, and that I couldn't even rely on my parents because they were fucking remarrying each other and I had nowhere to go. I felt like, well, nothing works. There is nothing. And having that Kierkegaardian moment of realization that I could, even if it was in a small way, take destiny and fate into my own hands and start to question a lot of things that were prisons that were making me miserable, that I didn't even realize were prisons that I were carrying around with me. And part of that was my ex-husband was a staunch atheist. And so I rebelliously started just experimenting with just like, dear God, will you be with me right now, please? Like, I'm really scared. And just seeing like what that effect had on my life and the peaceful opiate of the masses that religion and spirituality can provide. But if you're appealing to the idea of goodness in the universe, and I like everything I know about Jesus. I went to Catholic school.
Well, where did you grow up, actually?
Yeah, so I grew up in San Diego, and my dad is a Vietnam veteran. He was a combat Marine. He was over in Quezon for a month before he was shot twice in the face, and he is 95% blind, has had over 150 surgeries, and his nose is reconstructed from hip bone, and no one thought he would survive. It was a 13-hour surgery. He has a completely incredible story that is just, you can't even begin to, I always think of, because I'm old as fuck, like my reference points are old as fuck. So I always think of watching Donahue as a kid and Donahue saying, well, that's a whole other show, folks. And I always think about that with my dad. It's just like my dad is a whole other show within a show within a show. It's like every fucking thing that dude has it. Adoption, alcoholism, blind, and so he met my mom, who she had a breakdown when she was a student teacher and went home and lived with her mom. And then she was later diagnosed with severe OCD. But her anxiety was so bad that her roommate, Dolly, said to her when my mom was freaking out or obsessing over something, Dolly said to my mom, well, what do you want me to say? And it drove my mom into a nervous fucking breakdown, which I relate to so hard, because I mean, you internalize like a little baby duckling, all these little imprintings that you get, your dad's, volatile temper and reaction and impulsivity. And my mom's just debilitating perfectionism and obsessiveness. That's where I think my fear of of having been wrong, of being in trouble, of having made a mistake. It's just like that to me is like, there's nothing worse. And like being able to be okay with that is like a big part of the journey for me, is just realizing that you don't have to do that splitting black or white, all or nothing type.
Did you feel like you
thinking about yourself, that you were either dog shit or you were amazing?
Well, exactly. And did you feel like you were dog shit or that you were amazing for your parents?
I am so fucking eloquent. Dog shit. I'm glad I managed to get that in.
That's the clinical term. That's the clinical term. But did they ever tell you they were proud of you? Did they ever, did you feel like you had to be perfect for them?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know where. I just know that in my house, there was so much anxiety, stress, and anger. And that I think I set myself up like a little baby martyr, where I wanted to be the shock absorber for everyone else's pain to make everything okay. And that I could fix my mom's depression and I could fix my dad's anger. And rather than realizing that I had a right to anything on my own. And I think that, one of the things that happens when you grow up in a dysfunctional household is that there isn't this sense of conditional, unwavering love. Even if they do very much unconditionally, unwaveringly love you, sometimes it isn't communicated. And so you are left fighting for the crumbs and the scraps. And that's what you think you deserve. And you also are just so afraid of what will happen if you don't get a little bit of crumb. And I think that for me, I always just felt like everything would disappear. Like my dad might say something incredibly lovely about how he was proud of me and he loved me, but then in the next minute might be screaming at me because I had done something wrong. And it might be like really small. And then my mom, one of the funniest, like kindest, most loving, most brilliant people on the planet, if she was in the throes of her OCD and she said, like, mommy can't talk, I have to go crazy right now, and then was just washing her hands and making a scary monster sound, and was totally unreachable, and we just had to let her be that. Like as a kid, I think you just are very afraid of just, you get like very severe attachment issues. And I think that's probably like the biggest thing that I battle with is some of the attachment disorders that like come from, like growing up with like some of that dysfunction is, not realizing, that you have to like look after like yourself, and like, I just, I hated like the hypocrisy of like, people just, gawking at my dad and him having like a kind of like fucked up looking face and, making a scene and walking into like a tree and, just being the center of embarrassing attention of just screaming profanities and obscenities, and being so pissed that like people just like reacted to like him in that kind of a perverse kind of way where like you don't want to help or find out what's wrong. You just want to do anything you can to not be associated like with the shit show that's currently underway with this, blind, raging, disfigured guy having a temper tantrum, And I think I have always gravitated towards just like seeing the hypocrisy in that people can talk a really good game, but that when it comes down to like brass tacks, like people don't want to get their hands dirty. But I think I have always like internalized and taken it to an extreme where I lose myself, and because I don't think I ever felt like there was like a constant, stable source of protection in my life. Like I never knew how to do that for myself. And I also felt like if I expressed myself and I expressed feelings and I expressed vulnerability, that there would be, the crushing retribution that came with it, that just for example, I mean, when I got engaged and I told my dad that I couldn't wait for him to meet my fiance, and I could tell in his voice that he wasn't happy for me. And as a woman who has written about dating and her personal life and who has been asked every goddamn day of her life, not only, how tall are you? How tall are you? How tall are you? Do you play how tall are you? But also, what about you? Are you seeing anyone? What about anyone? What is that? And you just feel like you are always being gauged by your status and your worth as being something that is determined by your ability to be able to lock it the fuck down with a guy. And then if you aren't able to do that, then it doesn't really matter what you've done. You haven't been able to do that. And having been asked by my parents and been the subject of their concern for so long about who was I seeing and would I get married again and all these things. And I could just tell his response was coldness. He wasn't giving me any goddamn thing, because I mean, why would he? It costs nothing and it means the world to me. So why would you give that? Why wouldn't you withhold it? Because that's like a great sense of power. I express myself through my writing with him, and that is the safest way to express myself.
But you've never had a conversation with him?
I've had a million conversations with him. And I've also just had a million like rewoundings with him. And the thing that you learn in like Al-Anon is just, as I talked about in my seminal landmark Mark Maron What the Fuck interview, why are you going back again and again to the same place and the same people who've hurt you? And to me, that was like a really big, very hard lesson to learn, because there is nothing that is more like catnip than the idea that you will suddenly receive some kind of a transformative Hail Mary, stop the presses, it's all fixed, third act moment of redemption, like you're taught happens in life.
Those Disney stories don't really happen,
instead of, oh, hey, maybe you can love the person, but you can also not set yourself up to enter an ass-kicking fucking machine again and again and again, And so, yeah, I mean, I remember when I had this conversation with my dad, and I said, and I quoted it in the book, and I quoted it verbatim because I put it on speaker and I started recording it on my voice recorder because I couldn't fucking believe it. And I had to document for someone else just what this experience was. And he said, I just don't want to see you get hurt. And, which is a lovely, I believe in seeing all sides. And I do think that I often come to things with, the blinders of a lifetime of biases in regard to my family and my dad and everything. But to me, it just felt like moving the goalposts. Wait a minute. Like, you wanted me all this time to find a great guy who loves me. I just found a great guy who loves me. But now the new problem is that you're worried that I'm going to get hurt, and you've managed to take this perfectly positive thing where I haven't introduced anything negative, and I'm not a fucking spring chicken Like, I've done a lot of therapy. I've done a work. I'm not going to like just fall for some shithead, predatory, emotionally abusive dude. Yo, you know what I mean? I have multiple years of sobriety. Maybe your first reaction could just be genuine happiness. And my dad's reaction to that is just to start screaming at me. How about this, Mandy? You just give me a script and I'll just follow that. I can't do anything fucking right. I'm sick of being the family's asshole and just like, you know, hanging up the phone and just like, to me, that is terrifying, terrorizing to feel like, you know, and it is also like, quite honestly, like enraging when it's like when someone's like, oh, you should do Howard Stern. You should do Jimmy Kimmel. You know, have you ever talked to him? Yeah, I fucking talked to it. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying like I'm just saying like, oh, you think? Really? Oh, that's okay. Wow. Jesus. So, but, you know, thank you, because, I think the thought has flitted past, but I've never like kind of grabbed it and locked it down in such a way as to remember it as an epiphany that, that is one of the reasons why I have such a death grip hold on writing as a way to expression, and why I do have, whether you love it or hate it, an unusually high degree of ability to access my inner life, even if my inner life is, you know, me telling myself lies. I have an ability to access it in a way that like a lot of people don't. And I think one of those reasons is because of just the dysfunction of my relationship with my family, is because when you express things sometimes in the moment, it just becomes corroded by these fucking 48 laws of power mind games of defensiveness and sadism and withholding and just, you know, changing, rewriting the rule book mid-game, you know, and that is so exhausting. And in writing this book and in writing all the things I've written throughout my lifetime, for some reason, my parents have never reacted that way to that. They've always heard that and respected that for some reason. And I don't know why, if it's that I'm able to achieve a level of eloquence and clarity in writing that I can't in speaking, or maybe it's because I have, you know, such a, you know, kind of resting murder face type personality.
Well, actually, I mean, I was going to say there that maybe it's easier to read your words than it is to look you in the eyes.
Yeah, well, and my dad can't really look me in the eyes. So,
Well,
but yeah,
I suppose
yeah.
so. I guess bad example, but
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah.
Do you think that they know the impact that they had on you, or are they still oblivious?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I do think that. Yeah. I mean, I certainly hear that through their feedback they've given me about the book. And my dad, you know, he's said a lot of kind, empathic, insightful things, but it's just, you know, it's like fool me once, shame on you. Fool me 9,262 times, you know, keep one eye open, you know, just protect yourself. Learn some boundaries and some tools for not entering the ass-kicking machine that can be re-traumatization of like original childhood wounds again and again.
Yeah. You know, it's our stories in many ways are very similar. My stepfather had a severe head injury.
Really?
Yeah, he was a construction worker, and he was working on the roof of a building, fell through a hole, fell 15 feet and landed on his forehead, on top of his head. Yeah. He should have died by most accounts, but they were able to reconstruct his brain enough, I guess. And even when we were growing up, it was almost, I guess maybe his way of coping. He got us to touch the dents and the holes where they had wired his skull back together.
Oh, wow.
And we didn't appreciate at the time that his volatility like that was probably associated with that, you know.
Right. You just think it's
damage.
someone's personality.
That's right. Yeah.
As a kid, you don't know.
No, we didn't know, and grew up. We did grow up Catholic, at least my mother's side of the family. So there's some of that guilt and shame that ties in with that too. Is that you're supposed to love your parents and you're supposed to obey them, and they're supposed to treat you well and love you. But I don't feel that, so maybe there's something wrong with me,
right?
Rather than them. You know, and I think that's why I really connected with when I heard you on Marin, especially talking about that part of your story. So, you know, I think that'll be the greatest impact of your storytelling, in my opinion, is that there's so many other people, in my experience anyway, who've been through that kind of thing too, and who can really connect with that journey, that it's messy, right?
Yeah. It's hard to form a self-identity when you are growing up in that kind of an environment. Here's what it is, I guess, is when the parental figure's self-identity is so amorphous and volatile and prone to the short circuiting that is characteristic of a head injury. How do you learn from that as a positive adult ego state? If you want to look at, I think it's called transactional analysis, where if you are stunted in a kind of wounded child ego state and you haven't really learned or been modeled healthy adult ego states, forms of behavior where you aren't constantly tantruming out, you a lot of times can be stunted in your growth and progression as a human being. And
then something happens and it seems like you've gotten there. Something shifts at some point. Something changes where you switch from being a victim to something of a more of a growth mindset, that you're not necessarily what happened to you.
Oh,
that
right.
You can use it in many ways to be a source for something.
Well, and you know, credit to my dad. I do think that, and I don't know if you relate to this, but having an extraordinary, should have been dead by all accounts story had a very deep impact on me, where I do feel like I was modeled a kind of scratching, clawing sense of resilience at all costs. No one's going to fucking take me down. Fuck you. That, you know, is one of the biggest tools of survival there is being able to just feel like, you know, never count someone out. And the greatest satisfaction you can have is showing people that they have no idea who you are or how your story goes, and that reinvention is possible at any second and survival is possible at any second. So like, that's the thing, is just like, like you said, shifting from that victim mindset to one where you can grieve and you can nurture the younger, fragile, wounded part of yourself that really went through a lot of pain in dealing with, to use a clinical term, some fucked up shit, but can also look at it with the lens of just total gratitude and total acceptance, which is, you know, I think if someone said that to me, I would again want to fucking strangle them to death. So that's why I always try and qualify anything that's super saccharine, because I just think that's the last thing you want to hear if you're in a dark place.
When you're in the dark place, for sure.
Yeah.
But I hear this over and over again. People who have gone through it, and I can say that from my own experience. I guess I can't speak for anybody else, but I have needed to develop a certain gratitude for that I'm grateful for the worst moments of my life.
Totally. Right? Because I mean, the sense of fearlessness and purpose and seeking and inquisitiveness. And I actually, there's a study that just came out that I can send you that actually looks at the link between greater creativity in children who have more traumatizing experiences as children, which is fascinating. and perverse.
I did mark a couple of spots that I want to, and some of them speak to this and some of them don't. But now, 2 short months later, I'm face to face with Steve again, still unable to believe that he's taking such a huge gamble on me. I want instantly to prove myself to him and to anyone who has ever doubted me. I want to conquer the city, the newspaper, the industry as a whole. That really stood out to me, that the ambitiousness of that you have something to prove.
Right.
But where was that? Were you still in your place in your mind, or were you in a place, I guess, in your mind at that time where you felt like you needed to prove yourself, find your worth through proving yourself in that way?
Yes. Yeah, 100%.
Do you still feel that way?
A lot less. I mean, I'm the kind of person who, once I see the game behind the dynamic, like mathematically, the equation that's driving everything, it's a lot easier for me to not get as caught up in it. Right. So a lot of times I'm a lot more practical now, where it's more like not needing to prove the worth, but how great would it be to have something that provided me passive, high income the rest of my life. Right. So that, not so much as external carrot of validation, but the ability to go to Bermuda for a month and chill is more, I guess, what I desire. No, I don't. I mean, and I see it in a lot of other people, and I'm sure you do too, where you can see someone who is the richest, most successful person in the world, but they feel like if XYZ hasn't happened, that it's all gone. And
you're always moving the goalpost. It's always, you get there and then you got to do something else.
And you see how unsustainable that is, and how it's just it's a mental trick.
Yeah.
And it's just your ego screwing you over.
Yeah. And that's what I love about your journey too, because that's pretty apparent in the book. And I want to read one other small passage, but how you progress from that. Not to say that you're not ambitious now. I mean, you certainly look and sound still very ambitious, but it comes off in a much more secure way, I think, than it was a long time ago. And
it's a lot less thirsty and darty.
Yeah. And speaking of thirsty, so when it comes to your recovery, and I think this was after, it would have been after you entered the program, I think. But you give the example, the 5 examples of being offered the drink in the bar, right? And how you refuse and you refuse and you refuse.
And that's another reason why I'm so skeptical of the magical realism convincing that you can do to tell yourself about all the little signs God's giving you. Because if I would have told myself that story, I could have justified, well, clearly God wants me to drink. I was offered it 5 times. Cheers, And it takes something so much more and so much bigger, which is a sense of personal determination.
Yeah. Well, and there's a quiet rebellion.
To go against it.
Yeah, there's a quiet rebellion in that too, that you're really standing up for yourself in that small act and for what's best for you.
Yeah. I feel like, there's no way to say it without it seeming obnoxious, but the blessings and the abundance and the seeming miracles that happen rapid fire when you start making positive changes in your life are inarguable.
What was that pivot point? Was it the divorce? Was it, or if
to get sober?
No, well, just it seems like all of a sudden, like you say, you start to focus more on your growth, on your
Well, what I say is that, that makes me think of 2 things. One of which is that, if you are the kind of person who has ever wondered if you are an asshole, tend to go in the opposite direction, because just having the question of, am I an asshole, usually means that you kind of have a built-in asshole restrictive mechanism. And if anything, you could probably benefit from going in the opposite direction to build up a little bit of self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth. And the other thing was that there's a saying in 12-step is don't make someone else your higher power. And I don't know if I made my ex-husband my higher power exactly per se, but I kind of did, even though I wasn't in recovery. But I was so attracted to the idea of someone who had all the answers about how everything should be. And I put all of my effort into trying to get this guy to like and love me and be nice to me and wear the right thing for him and act the right way and not mess up and not say stupid opinions and get his validation and approval. When I just shifted all of that a little bit to start applying it to taking care of my own shit.
Yeah.
And to putting it into myself, when I started a blog, when I started doing stand-up and improv and all the rest, shit exploded.
Just one degree of change.
Because I had put so much energy into trying to just get this one person who kind of, rightfully didn't really like me because we weren't right for each other. And I was a nightmare, and who wants to be with someone whose entire identity is around trying to get someone to like them? It's amazing what happens when you like this. I always quote this. Someone, Jonathan Branstein, Jim Norton's manager, said this to me once when I broke up. He said, like the scene in Red Dawn when such and such is sobbing because he's just seen his father murdered. And Patrick Swayze says to him as he's crying, let it turn to something else. Let it turn to something else. And he keeps saying it to him. And that right there is everything. When you are drowning in self-pity, alcoholism, debt, hatred, obsession, fucking harness that, because that's raw energy, bro. And open a juice stand or some shit, do anything else that is remotely positive. And for me, when I took all of that energy and I started applying it to myself and also doing it with a sense of fun and realizing that nothing mattered because nothing that I thought was real. And I didn't have a best friend and I didn't have, when everything has been wiped clean, you have nothing to lose. You start to realize how all the shit that was weighing you down and that you're obsessing over is just like, boop. You won't even remember it. And so you can be a little more risky and fun-spirited and having that sense of play and wonder that you do when you're a kid, which a lot of times just gets beaten out of you.
Yeah. And that seems to be working pretty well for you, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mandy Stadtmiller, for having this conversation, for being so real and so open. We went
absolutely. Totally.
A lot of different directions that I wasn't expecting, but I think it was worth it.
Yeah, I apologize
Don't apologize
to anyone who wanted to hear a thread of thought finished that I did not. You can email me and I will write you a book in reply.
There we go. Speaking of books, Unwifeable, a memoir by Mandy Stadtmiller. Where can people buy the book?
You can get it pretty much everywhere. And I just like to say the link, unwifeablebook.com, because it's easy to remember.
Yes, it is.
If you want to check it out.
Unwifeablebook.com. All right. Thanks, Mandy.
Thank you so much.
There she is, Mandy Stadtmiller. Her book is Unwifeable. Go pick it up, check it out. I know that you'll like it. Don't forget as well, subscribe to the podcast. Please go on to Apple Podcasts or whatever major podcast platform you use. We're on all of them. Go on there, subscribe, leave us a rating, like it, share with all your friends and family. This is must-listen podcasting, so those ratings and likes and shares and subscriptions mean a lot. So please go on and do that. You can also visit us at markhennick.com/so-called normal. You can track me down. I'm not hard to find on social, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Mark Hennick. And I'd like to encourage you to go check out BetterHelp. If you're looking for psychotherapy, safe, effective, credentialed, well-trained psychotherapists who can come to you via your computer, via the internet's tubes, to come and talk to you and work through whatever kind of issues you're dealing with. You can get a 7-day free trial through using my promo code on betterhelp.com/Mark. Enter the promo code MARK, and you can get that free trial. So go check it out. Thanks for listening. This has been So-Called Normal.